From the Transitional Radio Uplink in Cuenca, Ecuador, you're listening to All Natural Being with guest host Henry G. Noel. What's the G stand for? Giddy up on IPMNation.com. Here's Henry.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this, the 351st episode of Brian Brody's All Natural Being, the #1 rated show on IPMNation.com and brought to you by Transitional Radio. Now, we're live this evening on IPMNation.com, Transitional Radio's Facebook and YouTube pages, with fly-on-the-wall video, or, as Brian calls it, the shunt cam, although maybe not for long, on Facebook and YouTube, with rebroadcasts on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, and a whole host of others. Now, we're broadcasting live this evening from our international uplink studio in Cuenca, Ecuador. And we want to thank our good friends at Wirecast for making it possible for us to be broadcasting live. So we also thank you, our trusted listeners, for without you, there would be little reason for me to be here, actually. No, we appreciate those listening live on radio and those listening to our rebroadcasts. And we want to thank our fly-on-the-wall listeners. We really do find it far more enjoyable having you participating in the threads and sharing your ideas. So to all our listeners from all over the globe, from places like the United States, Canada, Mexico, the UK, and Ireland, our good friends right here in Ecuador, China, the Philippines, and Brazil, India, Australia, Germany, Italy, France, Nigeria, Turkey, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, Belgium, Sweden, Israel, South Africa, Egypt, Puerto Rico, Kenya, the Netherlands, Colombia, Peru, Greece, Poland, Cambodia, and New Zealand. Thank you for investing your valuable time, as we are quite aware there are many other options out there where you could be spending your time. So thank you for spending it here with us. Really do appreciate it. Now, it is wonderful having you here. My name is Henry Noel, and I'm guest hosting for our good friend, Brian Brody, and I'm thrilled to be filling in for our virtual hitchhiker. So from 2 degrees south of the equator, where the girth of the planet is the greatest, we want you to understand that regardless of where you are on the globe, your life is still your jungle. And you, in spite of what you think and believe, you get to carve out your own path and hack out the underbrush that's suppressing your passion to live life the way you want to. Why cow down for the sport of others? You know, you would get this hand, so why not play it with all of the passion you can and play it the way you always dreamt you would play it if you only were given the chance. Well, this is your chance. No one is more qualified to control your life than you. So why cave into the pundits who presume they are in control of you? Why allow the opinions of others to derail you from your all-natural being? Don't get caught up in all of the garbage and foolishness that others use to demoralize you. Use your primal scream to stand tall, proud, front and center, and don't place yourself in second place. You're better than that. And we're here to ensure you have your rock star moment as your friendly force to place your heart's highest priority top of the list, reinstating the true wisdom and wallop of your inner whisper, pushing you to terminate the turmoil in your life, limit the liability of your luggage, and streamline your sensibility so you can face this insane world head on and out brutal. All of this so you can bring on your own bold once and for all. So get prepared for some audio acupuncture, where we treat all of the points of your chronic philosophical pain, providing auricular therapy to reduce your anxiety, medical qigong for your mind, body, and spirit, and Reiki for your rationality, all to provide a natural healing approach to the medical mayhem we call life. Welcome to healing in the nth degree. Are you ready? Are you comfortable? Well, good. Then kick off your shoes and let's get started, shall we? We trust that everyone has had a pretty good weekend thus far. We hope that it continues. And we thank you for joining us on this Sunday evening. Tonight, we resume our assessment of our past 2 years of change and self-renewal. And we present part 4 of this series entitled Labels. Now, we all have them, we all use them, and we are all judged by them. So for all of our radio listeners, email your questions to henry@henrygnoel.com, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if you're listening to the rebroadcast, then want to voice your opinions, email me and I will reply. What I'm trying to do is create an avenue for everyone to be actively involved in this show, so you can all discover your all natural being. So let's get this evening underway, shall we? Let's get into the thread and let's say hi to our fly on the wall video listeners, okay? And I actually have to find it because it doesn't seem to be here right at the moment. Gosh, I love it. So anyway, yep, I don't seem to have a thread here that shows that it's live. And well, we'll just play it by ear here. I'll refresh it here. There we go. We'll bring it on this one. There we go. We'll open this up so I can actually read the thread. There we go. Now I can say, yep, there's my brother. Thank you. Joseph, welcome. Greetings and salutations to you too. Hello, Rita. How are you? Let's see. Yep, there we go. And there's my brother. So this is good. I like it. So I want to take a moment at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll redo this at the end of the evening. I just want to say that tomorrow we have a very special guest with us, and they will be making a major announcement, and this will be at 8:12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So mark the calendars and get yourself prepared to be online at the time. I think it's going to be rather fun. So we'll go ahead and look forward to doing that. And in the meantime, we'll just wait to see who else is coming on. But in the meantime, I wanted to go ahead and tell you, it's been a lot of fun to be involved in this. It really has been. And John, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you on the thread. And everybody that's out there listening, thank you again for putting up with us and allowing us to invade your homes or your cars or your iPads or whatever you've been listening to us through. I really do thank you. I really do appreciate your being there. So tonight we're going to be talking about, actually, part 4 of this series, and it's called Labels. And what I wanted to do is to go through this a little bit and go through it a little bit slow, just to be able to cover as much as I possibly can with it. Alice, welcome. Alice, it's great to see you. So the labels, this is what we're going to be talking about this evening. And what I want to do is, before I get into it, I want you to think about the following questions just for a few seconds before I get into the program. So what I want you to think about are, for you, what are labels? And why do we use labels? And how does labeling work? And what are the results of using labels? What are the implications of labeling people? What labels have you attached to yourselves, which is the big question? And why do we attach these labels to ourselves? So this is some of what I want to cover in tonight's thread. So we'll go ahead and start. So first of all, labels. They are the in our head psychological name tags that we use to identify and call ourselves and others. They are what we attach to ourselves to describe the person we think we are and how we define others. Now, for example, Democrat or Catholic, Nigerian, a lawyer, white, female, fat, good for nothing, loser, ugly, disabled, alcoholic, victim. This is just a minuscule amount of the titles that we all attach to ourselves. So labels are a convenient method for us to kind of quickly categorize ourselves and others based on social definitions, social criteria, and social norms. Good evening, Lee. Welcome. Welcome to the show, Lee. It's great to see you. Now, whether we use positive or negative labels, it's what we say to ourselves every day. It's our self-talk, and has had the greatest influence on our lives, our identities, and the direction of our thoughts and actions. Society is grossly guilty because labels are what society uses to separate, judge, condemn, isolate, and discriminate with. We are what we think we are, but that is tied into our outer self, our persona. We conform to what society establishes for us because of the labels that we and society provide for us. And the worst part is we believe it instead of trusting our inner self, our all natural being. Good evening, Candace. Welcome. I'm glad you joined us. We're talking about labels this evening. So in part 3 of this series on hate, we learned that social categorization is the major process we use when developing our identity, our labels. It is the why we feel a particular sense of belonging to one group more than another. Why say it's in fact much of the process by which we develop our identities and is somewhat less than conscious. Well, I actually don't agree with that totally, as I believe we learn this as part of our imprinting, formulation, and our learning. We're taught socialization, and it is through social categorization that we disregard our inner self and adopt the persona. Now, we wish to be the persona we wish to be identified with. As much of our inner identities are our own sense of self, it should be no surprise to you that it often has as much to do with you because of the upbringing and learnings as it does with other people and their upbringing and learnings. So why do we use labels? Okay, here's the first question. So in the process of developing our individual identities, we tend to rely heavily on social categories, labels, that have been taught to us. These social categories are societies, social groups that people are placed in based on characteristics such as race and ethnicity or gender. These social categories assist us in quickly establishing conclusions about others and ourselves. John, yes, labels are useful or detrimental, depending on how we use them. Absolutely right, John. You're absolutely right. Now, we mentally group people on the basis of their demographics. For example, sex, age, ethnicity, and religion. We might use their personality and interests. For example, introverts or brainiacs or nerds, bullies, and bikers. We will also use their occupation, just to name a few of the social categories that we deal with. There are several important reasons for this. It provides us a way to organize and structure our understanding of the social world around us, because it is so complicated. For each meaningful social category, we are likely to have some preconceptions about what members of that particular category are like. We do this instead of having to start from scratch in figuring out other people. So we often identify the groups people belong to, and then based on our learnings, we develop assumptions about them, the stereotypic characteristics of the populations of these groups. Now, for example, you learn that your next door neighbor, let's say, rides a Harley Davidson, a chopper. Now you begin forming an impression of your neighbor, even having not met him yet, simply on the basis of his vehicle. And you immediately place his membership in this biker category, even if he were a brain surgeon, okay? So we have, I guess Bill joined us. It doesn't show up on mine. I apologize for that. And Joseph, we can't label, you can't label until you engage with that person. Absolutely, but we do that. And that's the problem, Joseph, we do. We will infer a social category on a person when we discover their occupation, for example, a priest, or based on physical observation, for example, assuming a person's age, based on their sex, physical appearance, their actions, and their mannerisms. Now, some categories are based on very clear criteria. For example, a monk with their wardrobe and their haircuts. Some categories are very vague. For example, what is the criteria for being labeled a nerd? Well, several characteristics have been developed providing a mental image of what a nerd label comprises. For example, perhaps dark rimmed glasses with white medical tape in the center holding the glasses together, or a pocket protector filled with pens and pencils. In such a case, someone being labeled is based on resemblances of our mental image of that category, rather than on clear set rules about category membership. For example, again, a 65-year-old retired man returns to college. Technically, he is a member of the college student social category, but perceivers may not think of him as a member of the category because he does not match the common image of that category. How does labeling work, and what are the results of labeling? Well, whether we're discussing people, objects, or events, categories or labels are essential for mental functioning. Using labels helps us make sense of the complex, multifaceted environment that we live in. By creating the labels, the world acquires a sense of order and purpose. Now, there are a couple of processes used to organize and structure the world into categories or labels, and these processes result in our losing the identity of who we are. First, when thinking about people who belong to a particular label, one mentally emphasizes their shared characteristics and minimizes their unique individual characteristics. For example, when one thinks of the category brainiacs, one thinks about the characteristics that are common to the members of the category, not the individuals themselves. And second, we emphasize the focus on the differences between different categories and the members of these categories. So for example, when we are thinking of brainiacs or nerd, we think of the ways in which brainiacs and nerds are different from athletes and those who are into art. Hello, Mr. Johnson. How are you, sir? For focusing on category membership characteristics, we make inferences about individual members when we don't have any other information about them. And that's one of the fallacies that we have with this. This is the prejudgment and the judgments. So for example, we might assume a particular member of the category of bikers would never attend a ballet or an opera, when in fact, that might just be their preferred form of entertainment. But because we label bikers as we have been taught that they are, we feel confident in labeling every member the same way, even when we're wrong. When we apply typical characteristics of the social category to individual category members, we facilitate social judgments people make. This seemingly beneficial process of labeling people and ourselves comes at a great cost, the cost of accuracy. Some bikers actually do like the ballet and opera, just as some men don't like sports, and some women don't like taking care of children or cooking. Joseph says the differences make us unique and special. And in a way, it sure does. It very well does make us unique and special. Candace says, I used to stay in trouble when I was a kid, beating bullies up. I always took up for the weak and sick and scared. And that was called all kinds of names, and you were called all kinds of names and treated awfully, and I get that. And Joseph says, if we were all right-handed, how boring. And again, yes, I have to agree with you, Joseph, but the stereotypical connotations that go beyond all that is where we have the issue. And it's good to see you, Lee. How are you? Okay. So the major consequence of social categorization or labeling is profiling or stereotyping, applying generalizations to all social category members. This results in misguided and misinformation being used as fact and creates erroneous or greatly exaggerated stereotypes about social groups. Steve Yeoman, welcome. How are you, sir? Social categorization results in our beliefs and definitions as to who we are, because we are also included in the category within which we place ourselves. Labeling results in carving up the world into us, in-groups, the groups to which we belong, and them, out-groups, the groups to which we do not belong. Because people think favorably about themselves, we tend to see our in-groups as favorable. This assumption, paired with the tendency to exaggerate the differences between groups, results in massive prejudices. And as we convince ourselves our in-group is superior to other groups, favoritism and discrimination become common. Given the global widespread existence of prejudice and the intergroup conflicts all over the world, from Northern Ireland to South Africa and from the United States to China, the dangers of social categorization or labeling are quite evident. Candace says, I've been called scooter trash. Really? Okay. All right. Okay, so what are the implications of labeling? So social categorization or labeling is inevitable, as people could not function without some way of organizing and simplifying the complex social world around them. However, social characterization carries with it the risk of profiling, stereotyping, and prejudice, and the injustices sometimes associated with them. Unfortunately, there's flexibility in the way that people label other people. People need not always focus on race or sex or other common bases for prejudice and conflict, but we can look to the shared categories that unite them with others. For example, members of our community rather than ethnic subgroups. And they can emphasize multiple category memberships of others rather than reducing them to a single dimension. For example, an intellectual female Native American artist rather than just an Indian. When people think in terms of multiple categories, they begin to recapture the variety of characteristics that make each of them unique, and each of us unique. Jimena, hello there. How are you? Welcome to the thread. It's great to see you. Now, for example, if you were approached on the street by a shabby dressed, unclean, unshaven man who was asking you for money, your brain would immediately respond by using these social cues to place him with a label. Now, this would help you to determine how you should respond to him. So in this example, you would very likely label him as a homeless man with no money, which is a conclusion your brain has made, not on viable facts, but by assessing the visual cues and assigning the man to be part of this general category of being homeless, even if the fact were opposite in reality. In this way, labeling is a shortcut used by your brain to conclude the existence of certain criteria. But remember, this process is a learned process. The brain didn't just jump to a conclusion with labeling him homeless. You, in fact, through your learning, provided your brain the data to come up with this conclusion. Joseph says, we have to be forgiven. Just because one person, group harms us doesn't mean all those entities will harm us. That's absolutely true. Absolutely. Matt Connaughton, welcome, and thank you for joining the thread. Let's see, Alice, you can't judge a book by its cover. Absolutely right. You cannot do that. And we do that religiously. We really do. We do it so easily. And look at the state of the world. That's a large part of it. What labels, all of this, in trying to understand it, comes to the point of where we have attached labels to ourselves. So the question is, what labels have you attached to yourselves? Do you identify yourself as a political affiliation? Democratic Party, or the Republican Party, Conservative Party, the Libertarian Party, the Whig Party? How about religious affiliations? Catholicism, Protestantism, Islam, Judaism, Buddhist, Hinduism, Shinto, Taoism. What about nationality? American, Mexican, Russian, Chinese, South African, Lithuanian? And how about your profession or form of profession? A doctor, a plumber, a carpenter, a lawyer, an engineer, or police? And what about social clubs you belong to? Lions, the Rotary, the Masons, Toastmasters, the Optimists, or American Legion? All of these go into how we define ourselves and how we present ourselves. And these are the labels that I'm talking about and how destructive they actually can be, because they place us into these categories that force us to be looked at the same as everybody else involved. Now, we identify ourselves with all of these labels, and therein lies our contribution to prejudice, discrimination, distrust, alienation, fear, hatred, and labeling. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at the news. Look at the political environment that's going on right now. One side can't even talk to the other. There's so much hatred, so much distrust, so much prejudice. It's insane. Our learnings have provoked us into labeling ourselves and others based on the prejudices that we've been taught. The excuses we use to justify this labeling is at the root of the problem, because we now accept labeling as normal, as human, and it's not. So then the question comes, why do we attach these labels to ourselves? Well, because labeling ourselves as part of a group makes us feel good, as it gives us an immediate sense of belonging and identity. But it also limits us in many ways. When we label ourselves as part of a particular group, it gives us a mental justification on how we should think and behave. So instead of thinking for ourselves, all we need to do is copy what other members of the group are doing. And as a result, labeling ourselves can often lead to blind conformity. Political and religious affiliations are perfect examples of this blind conformity. We never question the group's actions, its motives, or its beliefs. We accept them blindly, and we follow our fellow members blindly. Another thing that happens when we label ourselves is we develop an us and them mentality. Now, Kansas says, I can't even imagine how many people in the world ride motorcycles and every profession. But when on a motorcycle, they're labeled. Absolutely right. It's so much easier to label somebody than to get to know them. And that is where we fail. So we develop a strong feeling of allegiance to the group that we identify with, and we end up thinking less of people who aren't in our group or in group. Thinking of people in terms of groups or labels divides us and makes us more competitive. It limits who we become as a person. When we put a label on ourselves, it limits how we view ourselves. When we start to think of ourselves as this person, then it influences us to act more like this person. But often this label doesn't fully account for just how dynamic and complex we really are as people. Now, we have multi-layered self that is influenced by many different factors: genes, environment, relationships, parenting, education, past experiences, beliefs, emotions, habits, and our ego, for that matter. Have you noticed your behavior when you operate within these labels? Have you noticed how we eliminate people from our lives because they have different labels? We also criticize and gossip about these people. Have you noticed how our patience is very limited with someone expressing a different views or beliefs than ours? Have you noticed how we stop listening to someone because they look, believe, vote, eat, pray, and talk differently than we do? Have you noticed how we close our minds to a learning opportunity because someone is of a different political or religious persuasion? Have you noticed how we formulate our opinions and beliefs based on the group we are labeled with, and we have no tolerance for someone of a different label? We are all guilty of this. And for us to say we wish to change ourselves or renew ourselves or reconstruct ourselves goes way deeper than simply saying words. This is why I'm emphatic about the difficulty with changing and renewing and reconstructing ourselves. We have no idea how deep this prejudice is ingrained in us. We see fear and hate as normal and justifiable when it isn't. All of this has been taught to us, and we must unlearn it if we are to change, renew, and reconstruct ourselves. You see, what if we didn't have labels? What if we didn't have labels for ourselves? Well, when we don't label ourselves, it's much easier to agree with a group when you agree with them. And it's much easier to disagree with a group when you disagree with them. We can create our own belief system instead of following someone else's. When you don't label yourself, you can often connect with people easier because you don't have the superficial boundaries and prejudices of labels to make you appear separate from anyone. Labels limit who we become as a person. We get all bogged down in trying to fit in that we lose sight of who we are. And perhaps it's the very fact we have already lost sight of who we are because of the labels we so conveniently apply to ourselves so we can fit in. But we fit in to such a limited category or labeled group of people. As I stated earlier, when we put a label on ourselves, it limits how we view ourselves. When we start to think of ourselves as this person, and that influences us to act more like this person. But often this label doesn't fully account for just how dynamic we are. Trying to fit all these factors into one convenient label can often be very misleading. So having no label can really do us justice in describing who we really are. And stringing a whole list of labels together increases the parameters with which we define ourselves, just like before. In the example with the Native American woman, we string enough together, then we actually finally adjust outside the norms of what we define people as and how we label them. Let's see. Joseph says we all have God-given talents, and they have to be used for good. Stand up for that good. Exactly. I think that we ignore the infinite. This is from Lee. I think we ignore that infinite complexity of people, of the universe itself, really, because to acknowledge that is to recognize our own insignificance. But maybe that's just me. And no, I do. I think that's the thing. We have this stamina, I think this belief. Hi, Sarah, how are you? Welcome, welcome. We have this belief in ourselves and our ego that really pushes us to be individual. And there's nothing wrong with trying to be an individual. It really isn't. The problem is we are individual within groups of people, and we adopt their morals, and we develop and adopt their ways of seeing things. And I think that is where the issue comes in on us trying to see ourselves as individual, because we are social creatures. And so being individual is a statement, is a stance that we take to justify ourselves. But it's when we are tied to a group that is discriminating against another group, and we are going along with the flow just to fit in, is where the issues are. We end up hating people, and we don't even know why we hate them. We distrust people, and we don't even know why we distrust them. It's just because that seems to be the thing to do. And that is from following and not really developing your own thought patterns. Maria, I tend to label others to make ourselves look. Exactly, Maria, I totally agree with you. We do, and that's what we do. So we are not insignificant. We have to find our confidence. It's a hard task. Insignificant, I think, Joseph, in this case, is literally like we're a grain of sand, that together we are very important. And that's the case. And no, I don't think Lee meant that that we are insignificant. I think how we view things and how we deal with things tend to lend us to go in that direction. But that's because of the decisions that we make and the prejudices that we have and all of that. So what I'm trying to get to is be careful when we use the labels. In everyday language, labels can be useful, but we have to use them really carefully. It sometimes makes sense to point someone out based on race, gender, religion, or whatever, but we should never confuse these labels to define another person. And that's what we do. And I think that's where the insignificance comes in, because that's what we do. We judge them. It's one thing to define them based on race and religion, but when you now distrust them, hate them, can't talk to them, that's where we have a problem. So, for example, if I'm describing a friend of mine to someone else, and I point to someone across the room, it may be appropriate for me to say that he's the Asian guy, okay? Especially if he happens to be the only Asian in the group. But if I place connotations on the Asian group, then I'm doing a disservice to ways of describing and the labels that we place on people. The main point here is every individual is complicated, and no one is exactly like anyone else. And when we are labeling ourselves and others, we grossly limit who we really are by eliminating many of the characteristics that go into defining who we really are. Like the biker who's a brain surgeon. You know, we do this all the time. You are not your labels. And your labels have been placed there to join yourself with some people, but it mostly separates you from others. You have adopted and identified yourself with your labels because this is what you were taught to do. The sorority or the fraternity or whatever the case may be. This is the reason why I say you really don't know who you are, because you have been too busy being what someone else told you you were. It's up to you to decide if and how you wish to change, renew, and reconstruct yourselves. But the first step, once you've decided to change, is to forget the labels and define your own belief systems. It's extremely important that we get to understand that, because that is our limiting factor with us. When we associate ourselves with a group or just a handful of groups, we associate with those people. And again, we adopt all of that familiarity, those morals. The distrust, the hatred that the group itself finds. And of course, we won't argue with that group because that's our group. So we just go along with it. And that is where we just don't talk about, we don't identify our own beliefs. And that's where we fall apart. Let's see, insignificant in the sense that there's an infinite complexity out there, and we are not the center of it. There you go. Thank you for clarifying that, Lee, because you're right. That is what it's all about. We are insignificant in effects in the world, but we are major contributors in the way that we understand the way the world functions. And so it really is hard to really dig in to identify who we are and what we're all about. And like I said, until we can get rid of the labels, we never can get rid of the hate. We can never get rid of the fear. And these are topics we've already talked about. And we definitely lose the ability to be honest. And so taking these 4 in a row topics, all of them put together really define who we are and why we are the way we are and why there's so much hatred in this world. It doesn't come from any one person, but every person that contributes to it allows it to grow and fester and makes it normal or human. And it's not. This is not the way we were designed. This is not why we're here. And we have to get rid of all of these labels that we identify with. We're not a religious affiliation. We are not a political affiliation. We just simply have adopted those, probably from someone else's teachings, and then we identify with that. And then because we identify with that, we cannot even talk to someone of another political or religious affiliation. I mean, that is the saddest part of all of this. I mean, when you really look at it, I mean, you look what's going on. Look at Congress. Look at the conflict. Look at the arguing back and forth. A Democrat and a Republican cannot even sit in the same bloody room. That's insanity. And Einstein defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So what do? You vote for the same people. It's pure insanity. I don't get where we come from on this. And so it is really very difficult. And it's hard for us to understand this. And it's hard to wrap our hands around because we have dealt our whole life with this. And starting off from when we were children, how this became, how this has been part of us. John says, don't get rid of them. Don't get rid of them. We need to redefine them and continue to redefine them as we evolve depending on the current understanding. And I'm assuming you're talking about the labels, John. That's my assumption. So to me, the point here is if something is limiting us in our ability to get along with everyone else, again, we are one race, the human race. We're all one race. When we can get around to loving everybody else, then we are doing ourselves a service. Again, taking a group that has caused damage or caused problems for someone is not a reason to hate. There is no reason to hate. If everybody could get on board and start to understand that there is a driving force behind all of us, and that driving force is unity, not separation. that driving force is love and not fear, as I see the opposite of love. And it doesn't drive us to hate. So these are the areas that I think we really need to do. And it has to happen by us. Each individual has to do that. We can't harbor anger and hatred because of something that was done in the past. Again, to define our path. We create our path with every step that we take. And every time we remove our back foot to bring it forward to take another step, our past goes away. And we place our foot down to create the future. And the moment we've created the future, it becomes our now. It's a very simplistic concept to understand how and why we can live in the now. It's we worry about what happened before, and it doesn't exist anymore. And we worry about tomorrow that we're not even promised. So it's the now, and that's where we have to live. That's how we define ourselves, in the now. That's how we see our life in the direction it has to go, in the now. So thank you for clarifying that, John. Yes, labels, I got it. Yes, and I think we really do need to get rid of them. I mean, it would be great to just reference each other as fellow human beings. It doesn't matter the color. It doesn't matter the religion. It doesn't matter where we live. It doesn't matter the boundaries. What matters is we're all human. They're all brothers and sisters. It's what we do with that information that breaks us from the mold of the labels and the fear and the hatred that these labels develop and bring on. So that's how we have to work our way through. No, you can't change the past, Joseph. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And so if you can't change it, there's no sense in worrying about it. We let it go because there's no need for it. So anyway, we have about a minute left, I guess. I'm looking at my brother at this point, and he's kind of got that, like you got a minute look on his face. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to wind it down. Again, I want to remind everybody tomorrow at 8:12 p.m., we have a very, very special guest with us making a very major announcement. So please tune in, and I really look forward to that. I hope you guys have a great evening. I do hope that you ponder some of the things that we are covering here and start tying them together, because it is very important that you do, because they are so interrelated. When we get into the racism, you'll understand too where this is coming from and how all of this interrelates between labels, the hate, the fear, and trust, and which is another one we'll talk about, and honesty. And you'll see how all of this starts to interweave and interrelate, and why we are in such a mess that we are in. So anyway, everybody, I want to say good night. Have a great evening. Thanks for joining in, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.